March 15th of 2023. The time is 6:40 p.m. Welcome to Sutphin Boulevard Board Meeting. First order of business is a call to order so that we can take attendance to establish whether or not there is a quorum of the members of the board present. First person, just call out your name and what company you're affiliated with so that we can have that on the record.
Robin Escher for Sutphin Properties.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'll
Next.
go. Sharon Anderson, Office of the Queensborough President.
Next,
Carol Radin, Radin Enterprises.
next,
James Mangeluso, Office of the New York City Comptroller.
next person,
Raquel Olivares, SBS.
next person,
Norman Town Square Corp.
next person. Is that it?
That is it.
Okay, so we do have a quorum of the members of the board present. So the first order of business is for us to adopt the minutes of the March 2nd of 2023 meeting. Is there a motion on the floor for us to adopt those minutes?
I
I
make
make-
a motion.
Okay,
I second it.
okay. Is there anyone opposed to us adopting the meeting, or is there anyone who will suggest that some changes should be made to the minutes? Let the record reflect that there's no opposition to us adopting the minutes. So the minutes of the March 2nd of 2023 meeting has been adopted. The third order of business has to do with the slate. The slate, and I guess Sarah could explain it in greater detail. It's my understanding that it is a list of potential names of people who will become part of the board once the board becomes expanded, correct? Hello?
Well, let me say it this way. So we're presenting the slate for the potential board of directors. Upon the vote at the annual meeting, these board members would actually then become the new board.
But even though we have a number of individuals whose names are reflected, it's my understanding that at the annual meeting, we can always add some additional names, correct?
Not quite. So this is your point to add additional names right now. If you were to add additional names, the slate would still need to be balanced with property owners, Class A members being the voting majority of the overall board. I say voting majority because there is a Class E that is non-voting. In this case, it's Yvonne Reddick and Henry Yam are on the slate. So then when you take all the rest of them, the Class A, B, C, and D, you add them up. Class A has to remain in the voting majority. The process is that, so, and normally in a normal year with a normal bid and a normal board, there'd be a nominating committee who would research people and talk to people, put together a list, and then it would go to the full board. The full board would then approve that slate of nominees, and then it would go to the annual meeting where the broader membership would vote to approve or deny the slate. Members, registered members within a given class, so Class A property owners who are registered members of a given bid would vote on the slate of Class A nominees. Class B members, that is other people who are commercial tenants, would vote on the slate of Class B nominees. You can only vote on the portion of the slate for which you are a member ultimately when it goes to the membership. Right now in front of this board, the whole board votes to approve or deny the slate. If at this point, anyone in this group, a voting member of this board, says, I don't think person XYZ is a good fit, it could be modified at this point. At the point of the annual meeting, it is approving or denying. I have asked SBS to talk to specific lawyers, maybe have them as bouncers at the door, maybe. Um, only halfway kidding. To determine what the procedure would be if the slate were voted down by the membership at the annual meeting, or if there were nominations from the floor at the annual meeting, to be determined. But hopefully this group can come to some sort of slate that sets it up for success. So, and to give another angle of what's happening technically. So as a recap, on December 31st, 2022, the 165th Street Mall improvement, sorry, 165th Street Mall Special Assessment District, the 165th Street SAD was dissolved. The Jamaica Center SAD was dissolved, and simultaneously the Sutphin Boulevard bid was expanded to take over those geographies. So it is the geographies of the bids essentially that changed. What was left as, figuratively speaking, an orphan in the process was the Jamaica Center nonprofit and the 165th Street nonprofit, also called a district management association. Those nonprofits were left as sort of orphans to ultimately be dissolved by their board. But within this process now, what we're trying to do is bring in board directors. There's a specific reason why I'm using that terminology, and we'll get to it. Board directors from those other organizations or other people who are eligible to be board directors who have shown interest and leadership in the community, bringing them, voting them into Sutphin's boards, and then they officially become a part of Sutphin's board and have a say in its oversight. That is the reason why we're doing this right now. I know you guys had an annual meeting of the membership back in December, so this seems like it is pretty recent, probably pretty familiar. But the reason we're doing this is because the 3 geographies were consolidated.
So if we wanted to, at this stage, if we wanted to add a name or the name of a representative from a company, we could do that at this stage?
At this stage, yeah, it would take me a second to pull up the editable document, but if you want to open the floor for discussion and talk about that person, go ahead while I try to find the document open in real time.
Well, there is a company that is located within the boundaries of Sutphin Boulevard. We had a representative from that company, named Charlene. We have not heard from her, but we would like her company to continue to participate in the as a representative of the new board. So is there a way we can include them? Because we're going to reach out to them because they've always wanted to participate. I think Charlene is the one who's probably no longer interested in participating, but the company itself would like to have a representative to participate in the board. So is there a way we can do that?
Yes, let me explain what contact we've had with Charlene, and what Town Square's role in this process so far has been. So we reached out to every existing board member of the 3 organizations and asked if they'd like to continue to serve, especially considering there's going to be a higher time commitment the next few months than has historically been the case. We reached out to Charlene. The company is BRP, who developed the One Archer property, which is likely the sole residential property within the district. She moved away and was not interested in continuing to serve herself. Jerome spoke to her on the phone specifically and then followed up by email, and I've also emailed her a few times. She seemed nonchalant about trying to find someone else from her organization. So I
have an opinion on it.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
They wanted to take over the board.
Oh,
And when they couldn't, they lost complete interest. They wanted to get rid of Glenn. They wanted to install Charlene right in the middle of a pandemic, the height of the pandemic. And when they couldn't, she lost complete interest and disappeared. So I'm sorry, I just got to lay out the cards as I see them.
Based upon the fact that you have reminded us of what was taking place, in that case, it's not necessary to add.
You forgot about this?
Oh, I remember. I remember how.
They
we-
wanted to take a man's job away from him
I remember.
6 months into the pandemic, rounded us all up like it was an emergency, like something was going on.
I didn't realize they were behind it. I thought there were other individuals behind it, but I didn't realize it was BRP that was ultimately behind it. So I kind of learned something new tonight. Okay, but Robin, you're absolutely correct. It's not necessary.
Thank
to
you.
Amend, it's not necessary to amend the slate because I do remember those meetings, Robin. They were pretty heated.
I'm here and I'm continuing to serve, and
Yes,
I don't have the time, but I'm making the time
yes.
because of that, because I saw that happen, and I never want to see that happen again, is why I'm serving
Okay, so,
amongst my interests and,
sure, I understand. You're
okay,
absolutely
but
correct.
that was very concerning.
Yes, definitely. So, if we don't have any other questions or any other suggestions, so I will open the floor for a possible vote with somebody making a motion for us to adopt the slate as it is presented to us at this point. Are there any further questions from anyone?
May I
want-
just ask, may
Oh,
I
go
just
ahead.
ask about the numbers of nominees in Class A? I know that's this class that we have to have the majority in, but for the total slate, that's the number that we need to have, or this number can be expanded more, because if we nominate, more people get nominated at the annual meeting, right? And some may, it's likely that they'll all get in, right, into these positions. And so then that's it, or can more people be added to this list? And is there a cutoff, so to speak?
The answer to that is multifaceted. Trying to figure out which angle. So there's no provision in Sutphin's current bylaws that allow for nominations from the floor at an annual meeting.
Okay.
There may be some mechanism under the law that allows that, and I'm trying to clarify that well in advance to prevent chaos.
Confusion, yes.
At the moment, however, the names presented are people who affirmatively said they want to continue service. There may be some people who have ignored all our emails and phone calls and will say, hey, wait, but otherwise, these are the key people that have been interested. So it's unlikely there are going to be other people that are going to put up a fight to be in this slate. I think what is more likely to be contentious, if I were to speak frankly, is the second step beyond this. So at the annual meeting, the slate will be voted upon by the membership. And then at the first board meeting subsequent to the annual meeting, that's when officers of the board are elected among these people. That part may be more contentious about who becomes an officer and who doesn't, especially when there have been 3 sets of board chairs, 3 sets of vice chairs, 3 treasurers, and so forth. Technically speaking, in terms of could we add more Class A property owners at this point at this meeting? Sure, we could add an infinite number, but on a practical level, it becomes very difficult to have
To
meetings
manage.
with a lot more people. And in fact, when we get to the bylaws section, I have suggested a clause within the bylaws to cap the maximum number of board members. That is something that is up for debate and decision by you guys. This board is already going to be very large and unwieldy as it is. So there's that thought.
Okay, thank you.
So we
I know a
basically-
majority of these individuals on these boards and these companies I'm very familiar with, so I'm comfortable with what we're putting forward on this slate today. I just wanted to add that for what it's worth.
Yeah, it's a good point of clarification.
Are there any?
What I tend to see in other bids in other districts, especially in outer boroughs, is that the staff of the bid becomes much more familiar with commercial tenants, business owners that they see out in the street every day, and they want to add those, and then it becomes difficult to balance that with a slate of property owners to achieve the required balance, which is not the case so much here. You can see that there are a lot of property owners that are known to the organization, so that it's not so much a worry.
Sarah, let me just add that there are a couple of new members that were not part of any previous board. Grace Church, King Manor, where is it?
Greater
What
Jamaica.
category?
King Manor. And
What
was there a
category?
third one?
Okay.
Oh, we didn't get Port Authority in here, did we?
Yeah, the Port Authority is Anili Palacio.
Yes. Okay, so
Mhm.
those are the three. Now, Port Authority was previously on the Sutphin board and was directed off the board erroneously by our rep at the time. But the two new would be Grace and King Manor.
And that's from which class? Class
Grace
B?
Church owns
Grace
their-
Church is Class A and King Manor is Class B.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah, actually, I wanted to ask a question about King Manor. So I don't like, can you explain how they're a commercial tenant? Are they a tenant of New York City?
Yes.
Like the nonprofit? It's the nonprofit that's okay, got it. It's not like the music.
I guess the
museum a
city owns the
nonprofit?
property. I
the
Yeah.
assume.
city owns the non-property. King Manor Foundation of Long Island, I believe, is the formal name of
Is
the
the full name,
nonprofit.
yes.
And they have a lease to occupy the building.
The museum on park territory. And they have a commercial lease with the city.
Okay, got it.
Do we have any other questions? At this point, are we prepared to take a vote? I guess the answer is yes. So is there a motion on the floor for us to adopt the slate as it is currently presented to us?
I make a motion.
Okay, is there a motion to second that?
I second it.
Is there any opposition to us accepting the slate of names as it is presented to us? Okay, let the record reflect that there's no opposition. At this time, the motion that was made for us to accept the slate of names as it is presented to us has passed. The next order of business is for us to approve the bylaws. Before we do that, we have Sarah here, who's an expert on the bylaws, and she's going to point out certain sections of the bylaws that we need to be aware of before we proceed to take a vote on the bylaws.
Right. I'm gonna, before I open up the document for you guys and share my screen, I want to go over a few key points of terminology so that we're clear before we get into some of the technical aspects. Give me just a second while I determine which tab I need to share. It says host disabled participant screen sharing. So Glenn, can you enable that? I think there's
Yeah,
like a
I'll take care of
security-
that. Let's see. Where are you there, Sarah? There you go.
In the meantime, Sarah, may I make a suggestion to you? It's only a suggestion. You think it's possible for us to just, in terms of being able to follow you, you might say page 2, page 3, and you might say, for example, page 2, you might want to be aware of this, such and such, and then move on to, let's say, page 3, so on and so forth, and what we should be aware of, so that this way it might be easier for us to follow.
Yes,
Okay?
that is a good procedural suggestion and I will follow that.
Okay,
Okay, so let me share my screen real quick. Let's see, which application do I want to share? Just a moment. Let me do view slideshow and okay. Can you see
Yes,
yes, I
Okay.
can,
I'm working from multiple computer screens, and so sometimes it's not clear what you're saying. Okay, so what is in front of you right now is an illustration. This is something I clipped out of an SBS document, but I think it's a good one, so I'd like to show it to you. When we talk through the bylaws, we're going to be using a bunch of different terms. We're going to be talking about members, directors, officers, and occasionally staff or key personnel. So I want to go over what these mean. Every property in the district potentially has unregistered members and registered members. So members under New York State nonprofit law are anyone that the bylaws or their certificate of incorporation set forth as a category of people who can vote on something. The bylaws for a given bid have classes of membership that are similar to what we saw in the slate: property owners, commercial tenants, residential tenants, specific elected officials, and then other interested parties, which is usually the community board and the secondary city council member, if there is one. This also becomes really important relative to the annual meeting that's coming up, because only registered members of the Sutphin Boulevard bid can engage in the voting process at the meeting. Members of the general public, also known as unregistered members, can come to the meeting and listen and partake in the bagels and lox, but they can't participate in voting. So the difference between a registered and unregistered member is someone who's filled out a form with Sutphin, which is now both paper and digital. We're using the Eventbrite event registration link as a form of registration for this purpose. But it's basically people who are qualified to be members who raised their hand to the organization and said, I want to participate in your governance. Otherwise, they still get the services. The bid still picks up the litter in front of their building, but they're considered unregistered members. Of those registered members, they get to vote in the slate at the annual meeting. And that slate of people who is then elected becomes the board of directors. Sometimes in conversation we'll say board members, but I'm trying to be clear with this. Board of directors is distinct from members and membership broadly. Of the board of directors, that board of directors then elects within itself at the meeting subsequent to the annual meeting, elects officers. That's the chair, the vice chair, the secretary, and treasurer. So there's this pyramid of hierarchy of the largest group to the smallest group here. And then staff are the ones that coordinate the parts in red, the stuff in between. And there's always a partnership between the two. There are checks and balances on both sides. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing this screen. And then I will pull up the document with the bylaws. Were there any questions about that illustration there?
no,
Yeah.
Okay. Let me see. Sorry, I'm juggling a lot of tabs here. There is something else that another slide from another presentation I want to show you guys before we jump into that too, just to set you up for success here. Okay, so what you're seeing here is a presentation that may have been given by Zach Owens to the Jamaica Center Board before he left SBS, but regardless, what I wanted to talk to you about is how there are some questions about what is merging or what is consolidating on a legal basis. I'm not a lawyer, but because I've had to put this into practice, I feel like I can represent what's on this page here. So initially there were 3 nonprofits and 3 geographies, which I mentioned before, until December 31st. And then in January 1st, the 3 geographies and the mechanism for assessing those properties was all consolidated. And that the legal mechanism for that was local law 70 passed on June 2nd, 2022 through the city council. The other nonprofits, the Jamaica Center Improvement Association and the 165th Street Mall Improvement Association, still remain and exist. They have no formal ties to an assessment mechanism. They are, those organizations, those nonprofits individually are working on dissolving eventually. And there's a prescribed judicial or non-judicial dissolution process. Anyway, there's been some confusion among, word on the street is that people are confused about what's consolidating, what's merging, what's staying, what's going. It is that the 1 bid and 2 special assessment districts all consolidated their geography. These other 2 nonprofits are left to the side, and Sutphin is graciously inviting some of the representatives on the board so that it now has representatives from the entire geography. Are there any questions about this part?
No.
No.
Okay, so I'll stop sharing that, and then I'm gonna share another thing. Okay, so this was I used this slide at a workshop with SBS the other day. SBS is contracted with my firm to do a specific series of workshops there, but the point that's relevant here is that there are a lot of different laws that govern how bids behave and also what goes into their bylaws. So at the federal level, you have the IRS code. At the state level, you have the nonprofit law and then the bid law, which then authorized the creation of the bid law at the city level. And then there's the bid policy, which is what SBS puts forth, how they implement all of that in practice. Okay, so that's a long lead up. Let me finally pull up the bylaws here. I'm gonna share that screen. Okay, so let me make this larger because I know sometimes when people are viewing it on smaller screens, it can be a little hard to see. Is this level of text acceptable to everyone? Can everyone read that?
Yes.
Yes, that's fine.
Good. Okay,
I had to
so
switch glasses, but yes.
Alex asked me to make reference to the page number, so I'm going to scroll down for just a moment to point that out. At the bottom here, there's a footer that has the page number. So I will go back up to the top to start. Okay, pretty standard first page. Once it ultimately, so this has to be, process-wise, this has to be approved by this board, and then it goes to the membership for approval. Because the bylaws are one of the founding documents of a bid, they're sort of the constitution of it. It needs the broadest scope of oversight possible, which is approval by the members. Okay. So we have Article 1. Let me back up just a little bit. The previous set of bylaws was originally written in 2004 when the bid was formed, which is almost 20 years ago at this point. There's a lot that's changed in nonprofit law since then and also in technology. So in the previous version of the bylaws, there were a lot of references to transmittal of information by facsimile, for example. And that's not such a commonly used method. It's not a reliable method to get info to people anymore. So we, in working to update some of this, we inserted references to email communication, for example. The bylaws went from 10 pages in the previous edition to 17 pages now, and much of that was simply to update it to match the existing statutes. And then what I'm going to do as we go through the pages, I'm going to highlight some of the things that are more discretionary, that the law is silent on, but are operational choices the organization might make. So a sort of softball first one is for classes of members. Originally, it just said submitting pertinent information. I indicated what information is pertinent, as in we need to try to collect people's email addresses. So process-wise, I think as we go through some of this, I'm going to explain it. If you have a question or would prefer a change in language, please interject as much as possible. It's going to be hard for me to watch your faces and also go through the document. So I prefer for you to verbally interject rather than using the raise hand function or waving to me or something. I might miss it. Okay, so the rest of this is pretty standard language prescribed by bid law. So we are on page 2. We're going to page 3, top of page 3. A discretionary concept that we inserted in here for your approval is that each member shall reapply for membership every 5 years. Why am I suggesting this as a good practice? It is because to hold an annual meeting, you have to have quorum, and quorum is determined by the number of members you have. And you look at your membership records and you say, how many members have we ever had historically? This is the previous version of the bylaws. You know, if 500 people had signed up over the years as members, you have to go make quorum out of those 500 people, regardless of whether you haven't seen them since 2004 or not. Doing this, needing people to reapply for membership every 5 years is merely an administrative mechanism to allow you to get quorum. If people, this is not meant to discourage people from participating in governance, and we do believe that staff will make a good faith effort to keep the membership rolls updated and especially keep board directors apprised of what's going on. But this is a mechanism so that you will be much more likely to always have quorum in annual meetings. If there are no objections, I'll proceed to the next part. Okay, so at the bottom of page 3, there's a section about public annual meeting, which is required for any nonprofit corporation that has members, which is what this bit is. The law says that the bylaws need to state a date. We hedged that a little bit by saying May or June, such that, I mean, it's close to the end of the fiscal year, and so that's when many bids tend to do it. It makes it a little bit easier to be able to approve a budget and fit that into the cycle. This year, obviously, we're doing it in March, but we're operating under the old bylaws right now, so that it doesn't conflict with the bylaws. Notice of meetings. So we interjected a bit about electronic mail or nationally recognized overnight delivery service. That's a pretty standard update. Quorum. You can see over in the side, I made notes to myself about what specific sections of laws these apply to. Voting. Most of this is just boilerplate language. Let's see, at the bottom of page 5, I mentioned conference telephone or video system. That's a new addition. Size of the board. This is a major discretionary question for you guys. I have suggested that it be not greater than 25. However, soliciting
That's a big
feedback from
board.
you guys. What do you think about that number?
Sounds like a
Especially for-
large board.
It is a really big board. It's a pretty unwieldy board. The one that was just passed in the slate is 23.
I have found that the larger the board, the more difficult quorum and things sort of fall apart on boards that I've been part of during my business career. What's the minimum we can have?
The minimum statutorily required for bids is 13, and that's 7 Class A directors, which are property owners, at least one commercial tenant, at least one residential tenant, 4 representatives of specific elected officials. That's the mayor, the comptroller, the borough president, and the city council member, at least the one whose district covers the most of the area. And then if the organization so chooses, they can have a class of non-voting members, which is typically the community board and the non-majority city council member. But the minimum statutorily required size is 13.
I would go closer to the 13 than the 25. Simply, as I mentioned, just my experience, and I'd love to hear the experience and feedback from others.
Yeah, but the problem that we have, Robin, is that this is to accommodate people who participated as part of separate boards that are not being consolidated. So if we reduce it to 13, obviously a lot of people who want to serve and are eager to serve will not have that opportunity.
Right, we don't want to do that either.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I understand your concern that is going to be whenever we're going to have these board meetings, my God, I mean, Lord knows, it's going to be difficult, but
So what's the context in which that made us include the new members like Grace Church, for example, and King Manor Museum? Why were they included? Because though, they did not have an affiliation before. So, I can see we're trying to accommodate everybody to some extent who has been active and involved on all 3 boards prior to this. But those 2, for instance, are new. So why did we include them? Because they expressed interest in being part of it?
Perspective, and then Glenn should also offer a perspective because he's the one that highlighted these possible entities. From my perspective as an outside consultant who's going back and forth between these 3 boards right now, there is a need for people who are not entrenched in the power structure of any one organization to serve as a neutral force on the new consolidated board. And I think those other entities, especially because this district is so heavily civic and governmental, those other entities can help provide that effect.
Balance, okay.
But Glenn should also give some commentary on this specific.
Yeah, I would add that all 3, well, as I said earlier, Port Authority actually was asked to come off of our board for a technical reason. And we found out and they've been expressing interest to come back on. And so this was their opportunity to do that. Grace Church is also very interested in being part of the process going forward, as well as King Manor. And both of those organizations want to be part of what's happening in the downtown area.
One possible balance I can offer is another clause later in this that is about how to remove directors from the board if they are not actively participating, so that you can achieve quorum in the future. And we can talk about that when we get to it. And if you want, we can go back and revisit the size of the board question if you feel like that's not sufficiently balanced by the ability to remove people. Another option we could do is lower that 25 to 23, so it's set at the amount that we have right now. I mean, that is on the slate for election this time. So it won't get bigger than that. It could just get smaller. I have personally been in organizations that have had 32, 33 board members, and I was an executive director at an organization like that, and I spent a significant amount of time serving as a board liaison to track down those few people who were consistently not present. So I can see a real risk of the size of even 25. It's hard, and it is hard to find conference rooms and things like that. So there are political considerations and practical considerations that are real and meaningful here. So if you want, I can put a highlight on this and flag it as something that we can come back to at the end. How does that sound?
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, so the next section, composition of the board. This is a discretionary, not statutory clause. I recognize that there is some concern, honestly, from each organization about making sure that they were represented in a meaningful way on the board of the consolidated bid going forward. And so I drafted in here a clause saying that essentially you got to have someone from Sutphin Boulevard, someone from Jamaica Avenue, someone from 165th. Now, Jamaica is obviously the easiest choice overall because there are just simply more properties on it. There's always a risk in the future that someone would say, it's hard to get people from Sutphin. It's a smaller area. Let's just forget Sutphin. So I am suggesting this clause to make sure that you're always represented. However, it does make it a little bit harder potentially in the future. Any thoughts about that?
Not in particular.
Hold on a second. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
When you say in additional, you mean in addition to, right?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay. I mean, I don't have a problem with the way you have it written. So,
Okay, if there are no other objections, we'll go forward to the next section. So the next parts are statutorily dictated. There's not really much to, there's no discretion there. Going to page 7, section 4.6, classification of directors in terms of office. This is another discretionary thing that I'm suggesting. I am suggesting that directors may serve up to 3 consecutive 2-year terms and then be term limited. So they would have to wait a full term before they can potentially be reelected to the board. The reason I'm suggesting that is to prevent entrenched power dynamics that may dominate a board for the life of an organization. The downside is that there is a potential loss of institutional knowledge. The remedy for that is having the terms be staggered. So one set of people does 2-year terms like this, another set does it like this. So they're offset. So at each annual meeting, you're electing half of the possible directors to be elected, and then half of the next one and half like this.
how's that going to be possible? I'm sorry, Sarah. How's that going to be possible when everybody's starting now? So
these bylaws would take effect after the annual meeting, which means at this annual meeting, the group would be electing the whole slate, but at the subsequent annual meeting, half of the people would be elected for just 1 year. The other half would be for 2 years, because currently people are serving 1-year terms on the board. So this is kind of an intermediate step. This is something that would go into effect for the next election of directors.
so that if we don't have it in a staggered manner, we run the risk after 6 years of losing a whole bunch of experienced people.
Right. And as we were waiting for people to join the meeting for quorum earlier, you were asking about, we were talking conversationally about the difference between a natural person, as in a real human being, versus an organization sitting on the board. And I was actually asking Lawyers Alliance about that this morning and trying to get some clarity about that, because when it comes to members, you know, in the pyramid, with members being the big group at the bottom, members can actually be corporations. They don't have to be a natural person. They don't have to be a human being. A member can be 123 Sutphin Boulevard LLC. It does not have to be Adam Smith, sole owner of that LLC. It can be the legal entity. But in terms of directors, I think it makes the most sense for directors to be a natural person. I don't think this question has come up in a practical sense at other bids. I mean, it would seem kind of absurd to be electing, you know, Chase Bank as opposed to a specific person at Chase Bank to a board. However,
But may I ask, what about when an organization like, say, Chase Bank is on the board, and then they can rotate who they send in? So isn't that the same thing?
well, if we clarified that a director had to be a natural person, not another type of legal entity, then you could have Adam Smith from Chase Bank serve 3 2-year terms, and then Jane Brody from Chase Bank serve subsequent 3 2-year terms, because those are 2 different natural people. And that would achieve the same effect of preventing entrenched power interests staying around for 40 years or so, while maintaining some institutional continuity.
Okay.
So you're saying basically that 2 people from the same corporation presumably would have different position with respect to certain issues, as opposed to the position taken by the corporation. Have I confused you?
No, I
Not
hear what-
simultaneously, she's saying consecutively.
Yeah,
So, right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I may have said simultaneously and I meant consecutively.
yeah, no, so far I've been following what you're saying, but in terms of power structure, you don't want a certain group to become entrenched. So when you're saying that, hey, listen, we don't have to wait that 2-year period. So since it's a different person from Chase that's going to be coming in, presumably that different person from Chase is going to have different views. But I think when you're dealing with a corporation that has its own agenda, it's still going to be the same power structure, correct?
You know, I haven't seen Chase Bank be the problem. That was an example.
Okay.
And right, that was an example, and that was in Class B. So I think Class A is where we would be more concerned about in this instance, because that's where the property owners are, right? And we've seen a long history of them being active and entrenched. I think the key and the secret is to make sure that as much as they remain on the board and active, that they rotate out of their leadership position. If they get to be on the, you know, if they're on the executive committee, then that they're rotated out and they don't just, all become the treasurer, the secretary, the vice chair and the chair, and that they rotate out of those positions, because then that's when we have, just the shared perspective that is, doesn't change. And then we only have this one fixed perspective again. So I think that's the important thing to do.
I think what you're suggesting, that they can remain members of the board, except positions that generate a lot of power and authority, such as board chair, vice chair, things like that. They can be term limits to prevent them from doing that. Actually, that's a pretty good idea. I mean, this way we don't kick anyone off the board. It's just that, hey, you're no longer gonna be president now. You're no longer gonna be vice president. Okay.
Yeah, I
Right, so
think
we
that's a
have
good
to honor
remedy.
that.
So in that
like that
case, what
idea.
I would suggest is deleting the sentence that I have highlighted here. And let's see, because I think that's the only sentence that makes reference to term limits. Let's see. I mean, directors still have to have terms under the nonprofit law, and the default is to have 1-year terms. Doing 2-year terms that are staggered is still a good practice because it limits the lift that you have to undertake each year to try to find new directors to fill slots that come vacant. Of course, if someone stops coming to meetings, then you have to find a new person anyway. So there are a few different questions here at this juncture. Do you want to eliminate the highlighted sentence? And do you want to keep or eliminate the concept of 2-year staggered terms?
I like the highlighted one. They can serve up to 3 consecutive 2-year terms, and then after that, they'll be precluded for 1 full term.
That
See,
would be term limits for directors. If you want to transfer this concept to term limits for officers, we could do that instead, which seemed to be what Shern was suggesting.
Yeah, I think I would be more comfortable with that, and knowing the group as well, I think they would be more comfortable with that. And what it doesn't make you eliminate someone who might be, reliable and a good board member and someone who you can, depend on. And so,
Sharon.
Absolutely. I think that's because it's really about the power vacuum at the top that you want to rotate out. And you don't want to lose the contacts and or the relationships that the board members are bringing to the bid.
I
Okay.
agree with that.
So what I suggest is that I cut this text out. At the moment, I have it in suggesting mode, so I can view the changes at the end and accept them sequentially in case there are any typos. Let me skip ahead for just a moment to the section about the officers so I can place that sentence in, and then we'll go back. Let's see, officers and committees, appointment of officers, powers and duties, removals, committees. So for the moment, just so I don't lose the text, I'm going to put it right here and then we can reformat it in a minute. I'll put the word. Okay, and then let's go back up to where we were. Okay, so then if we were to look at, we were talking about a remedy for having a large board and the difficulty of achieving quorum if some people become disengaged. So this is a discretionary clause, not statutorily required, but something that I think Glenn actually suggested this based on another nonprofit he's on the board of. Missing meetings, 3 consecutive meetings without an excuse would be subject to termination from the board. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's great.
And it really speaks to people who aren't interested or not even trying to get to the meetings.
It's not just interest, Glenn. I'll give an example. If you recall, there was a period of time, I mean, I was one of the ones that spearheaded this bid, but there was a period of time that I stopped serving.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I remember.
And that was because the meetings were being held at a time of day that it was impossible for me to attend. So it's not necessarily that you become disinterested. It's sometimes the schedule moves around and someone just can't attend.
But that's why they have the language without an acceptable excuse. That would be considered an acceptable excuse. I mean, you have to run your business. So
Right.
if they're having the meetings at 10 o'clock in the morning and you can attend, that's clearly acceptable.
Well, I think also it's going to be particularly difficult right now and going forward over the next year or so, having merged or brought new members into Sutphin's board, because I can tell you that the other two boards habitually hold their meetings at 9 or 10 a.m.
That's,
And that's a big gap from what you guys have been doing. And so
9 and 10 a.m. I mean, that's almost impossible. I'll be honest with you. That's almost impossible to
I
attend.
give, right, that, for example, with me, we were holding the meetings at 9 and 10 a.m. And if I'm attending a meeting, at 9, 10 a.m., my business day's shot, or at least a good chunk of it is shot. And I would imagine that that's the case for some others as well.
Myself included.
I think it becomes self-sorting when, I mean, assuming a normal situation, not this very unique consolidation, but I think normally when people tend to, when a nominating committee tends to try to recruit people to a bid board, they say, we tend to meet in person or we tend to meet virtually. We tend to meet in the mornings on Wednesdays. We are looking for people with these particular skill sets. And so it's tailored a little bit to what people are comfortable doing so that they can participate in the governance. And I think that is going to be something that's going to be really hard going forward in the next year.
I'll be honest with you, once we started doing things virtually, we had greater attendance virtually than we were having in person. Because, I mean, the reality of the situation is so many people have so many different things to do. And similar to the situation Robin is in, I can tell you, it's impossible for me to attend in-person meetings from 9 to 10 o'clock in the morning. Okay, it's impossible. I can't do it because I have to be in court. And I just can't do it. Okay, so I think the afternoon, I mean, early evening meetings, especially if we do them virtually. I mean, look, listen, corporations do those meetings virtually. They do meetings in the afternoon, early evenings virtually. And sometimes you have 50, 70, 80 people attending virtually. It's not a problem. Okay, I mean, I understand a lot of people want to do things at 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock in the morning because obviously they want to do things within normal business hours, but it's not always a reality. Okay, that's a problem.
These are,
Well, it means that it's something for the board to consider going forward and then to vote in, do they want to opt to do virtual? And then they will have to find a mutually convenient time for the majority of the folks. So, I mean, I'm enjoying virtual meetings, so it's very convenient.
I mean, look at, for example, the meeting that we're having tonight. It is extremely productive. I mean, we're here. I mean, we're going over the bylaws. God forbid, if we had this in a conference room, half of the people would be snacking right now. Half of the people would be phones right now. I mean, you wouldn't be getting the attention that you're getting now, Sarah. Seriously, I mean, that's what used to happen. By the time they would get to the meetings and everything, half of those people were already tired. And then they would be saying to themselves, hey, like, for example, when one person was coming from Staten Island or whatever it is that he was coming from, I'm referring to Glenn coming from Staten Island and everything. Yeah, it was like, but once we're doing it virtually, it was great. Okay, but that's beside the point. So I don't want to delay things. So far we're doing very well in terms of going over the bylaws and so on. You're doing a great job, Sarah.
thank you. Okay, so if we go down to, it's the middle of page 8, it says quorum and voting. This part is, I highlighted it, but it's not discretionary. This is what's the minimum required by nonprofit law. We can be more restrictive in the sense that we could require a higher threshold for quorum, but this is what's required by law, so that's what I have in there. sometimes it's hard enough to meet that. This I merely highlighted because it was an update for the times, conference telephone or electronic means. It used to be that until April of 2020, when then Governor Cuomo put out an emergency memo, nonprofits were restricted about how they could legally conduct business, what could be legally binding over the phone. So some of this is long overdue in general. Okay, so we get down to officers and committees. So we've gone past members to, members, directors, and now officers. Those are chair, vice chair, secretary, and treasurer. So none of this part is new or novel. I pasted in this section to figure out how to integrate it. Let's see. It seems like it should probably go before this sentence. How does that sound?
Only employee, I'm sorry. You said
Let me grab the text. I'll put it in and then you can see how it fits. So if we're instituting term limits for officers, but not directors, so keeping directors on the board as long as the members will for them to be so, but limiting officers so that they have to rotate off occasionally. I'm suggesting we put the sentence here in this paragraph in section 5.1.
Okay,
Right.
that's fine.
So then you will take out the sentence prior to that, that says each officer shall hold office for a 2-year term until a successor has been appointed and qualified.
Let's
Especially
see.
since they can.
I guess,
Still consistent. I think that's still
yeah,
allowed.
it fits, it works, because
Yeah, but the next.
they can
sentence-
hold office for a 2-year term
Yeah, but
and
then.
serve up to 3 consecutive 2-year terms.
And then what was your question about the next sentence, Alex?
Oh, okay, yes, okay, for one, okay, so the term, so when they elected, it would be, the term would be 2 years. Okay, they can serve up to 3 consecutive 2-year terms, which would amount to 6 years. Okay, yeah, that's
And
fine.
let's change this to may serve again as an officer after a full term has passed. Does that make sense?
And so do we want it to be 3 consecutive terms, which means 6 years, right? As opposed to 2 terms, which would be 4 years.
Yeah, what do you guys think?
I think 4 years is good. What do you think? 6 years,
I think 6 years sounds a long time,
yeah, I
but
know.
Yeah.
4 years sounds, you know.
I think 4 years, I mean, my God. 2-year term, 4 years. The president of the president of the United States serves 4 years.
Right.
That's a good point.
And as a point of reference, the average nonprofit executive director serves 2 years in a given role before moving on. So 4 years would be seeing 2 average executive directors. At this point, Glenn is an old timer in the role.
But
Okay,
with this, are we saying that you can only be on the executive board for 4 years, or just saying in a particular role, like you could do 4 years vice chair and then go immediately into chairperson for 4 more years? Or is this like a restriction on
I
the
think the
officer?
intent is about the executive committee, but it's a good point that you bring up, James, about how to phrase it in such a way that it means they have to leave the executive committee.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I don't think it's not that we want them to necessarily leave the executive committee, or you think we'll still be with an entrenched group just rotating around in all those positions?
Why is it a second? Hold on, it keeps moving up. Hold on.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
There
Just,
could be a different restriction on how long you can stay in the executive committee, separate from the term limit in a particular position. So there could be a 4-year term limit on a particular position, but then, I don't know, an 8-year term limit on executive board and executive positions in general, or something like that.
Sarah, can we say the officers might serve the executive committee up to,
How about me? All right, say that again, how you want me to phrase it?
the officers might serve the executive committee, if that's what we're trying to do, because I know we're trying to prevent people from, staying in these positions for a long period of time and provide an opportunity to other people to serve.
How about the officers may serve in an executive capacity?
Mm,
I think, actually, we might need to just say chairperson, vice chair, secretary, and or treasurer, because I don't know that executive committee is defined.
mm.
Yeah,
It
It
that's,
doesn't look like it.
yeah, that sounds good. So president, yeah, I'm sorry.
Below, it's listed as chair.
As
There's-
chair,
The executive committee is defined
it
Oh,
is
is it?
just a little
in
bit,
B.
4 cents.
by 4, point B.
Let's see, 5 the executive committee, you're right.
Okay, chairperson and vice secretary. Okay, so now, all right, so
If we go back up, each officer may serve,
how about members of the executive committee? Members of the executive committee shall. Okay,
wait. You wanted to say members of the executive committee shall serve? How do you want to phrase this? You're the lawyer here.
yeah.
I'm just the
Members of-
paralegal.
Members of the executive committee may serve as members of the, hold on a second. Yeah.
Serve up to.
Might serve, that's it.
Up to 2 consecutive and will serve again as an officer after a full term has passed. So, right,
What-
so then,
Any member or members or any member of the executive committee may serve up.
members of,
Yeah, any member of the executive committee may serve up to 2 consecutive. Yeah. Okay.
But is this what we want to do or we want to change the time frame here?
Okay. Whatever you guys,
so an executive member may serve up to 2 consecutive terms, which means they can serve for 4 years and then may serve again after a full term has passed. So then they can still be a part of the board or a director, but they're not on, they cannot go back to being an executive committee member unless, until after 2 years, right? That's what we're saying.
But I mean, is that a good idea? Because what if someone is elected the chairperson, the vice chairperson in the same year, and then they have to leave it the same year? So it's impossible for the vice chairperson to go into the chairperson position, which presumably the vice chairperson position is somewhat of a grooming position to be the chairperson. So is that what we really want to do? Just limit the executive committee in general to 2 terms, or do we want to limit a particular post to 2 terms and maybe have the executive committee time frame be
Okay.
allowable for, say, 4 terms or
so
something?
you're
something like
saying, you're suggesting that the chairperson and the vice chair, they'll be staggered. The term.
I mean, I suppose you could do that too, but I mean, is that reasonable? Because that might not line up correctly with when they were
Sounds like
elected.
there are 2 different interpretations. James, it sounds like you're picking up on an alternative interpretation, which is valid, and we should probably clarify. It sounded like the intent of the group initially was like, if you serve on any position in the executive committee and you hold it for 4 years, then you have to cycle off for 2 years. James, it sounds like you were suggesting, so like, should we spell out chairperson, vice chair, secretary, treasurer rather than executive committee? Like, how would it clarify?
I don't think. No. Well, I suppose what I'm saying is, should we have a chair for any single position within the executive committee? You may only serve 2 consecutive terms in that particular position, but you may serve on the executive committee for, say, 4 terms. Like, I'm just asking if maybe is that something.
Okay, I see what you're saying.
Oh,
Okay.
so
Because,
That's
like,
what
you
I
gotta have
was
secretary
originally,
the
that's what I
treasurer.
was originally saying.
Oh,
Sarah,
Yeah,
okay.
I
didn't
thought that's
you,
what Sharon was saying.
didn't you mention, Sarah, that maybe we didn't want to vote everyone out at the same time, so we didn't lose the
The
institutional
talent
knowledge?
and the institutional
Yeah,
knowledge,
like
right?
maybe that's something to think about. Like maybe
But
we can
remember,
vote for the let's say the chairman and the secretary, and then we do the vice chairman and you
But
know,
the-
like not all of them at the same time.
The chairperson can only do 2 terms he would be prevented from doing 3 consecutive terms, but that doesn't prevent the vice chair now for running for, but what if they've been acting in cahoots? What if the president and the vice president?
I think Raquel has a point, because if you limit, because, okay, everybody signs on and is voted in this year, they all, you know, serve for a year, and then that's when the staggering begins, right? And so then we decide, okay, so the chairperson and say maybe the vice chair and the treasurer are the 2 that has to be rotated off first after a 2-year term, after
Okay, may
next
I-
year's election, right?
Okay, may I-
And then we move,
I'm
sorry.
May I present a scary scenario? Let's say you have a chairperson and a vice chair, okay? After 4 years, what's gonna prevent the chairperson from now becoming vice chair and then having the vice chair becoming chairperson?
Right,
Okay,
Nothing.
right, this is what we're trying to avoid, right? Where it's only a certain power structure remains in place to such a point that it just dominates and we can't change the perspective. So, but I think what could happen is what Raquel was saying, if you make it so that in next year's election, the vice chair and say maybe the treasurer is voted off and is rotated out. And then, so you stagger their election. And then the chairperson, and maybe if there's a second vice chair, or what's the other position? The secretary, the chair and the secretary rotates off at a different time. You know what I mean?
I
So, like,
And then we would have a staggering so we can move them around, and, you know, the chair will remain the chair. Whereas the secretary will have to move off, and the treasurer, or, you know what I mean? You pair them up so that 2 moves off at the same time while the rest remain. So they're never in a position where they can just pop off out of this position into that one, just like that.
I think we're making too much of possible experience, because we're talking about, oh, we want to have continuity if that administration is doing very well, and so on and so forth. I think what we should be more concerned about is to make sure that before someone runs for an office, that person needs to have been a member of the board for at least maybe 4 years, or 2 years, or maybe 4 years, so that whoever now is going to become chairperson or vice chair, we have somebody who's already familiar with the issues, who's familiar with the board. So that this way, if that person then becomes chairperson or vice chairperson, we're not going to be concerned, oh my God, this is an inexperienced person who's in the position, and so on. So I think that's what we should be focusing on. And then,
Well, that's an important point to have in our bylaws as well. I don't know if that's there, Sarah, you would probably know. If
That's not
no one can
there.
serve as an officer unless they have been a member of the board for 2 years or something like
yeah,
that.
2 years or 4 years, yeah,
Right,
or 2
right.
years,
We-
maybe 2 years, yeah.
We could add that, but the unintended consequence is going to be that these bylaws, if approved at the annual meeting, would take effect after the annual meeting. So for the first board meeting, and what that means is that people who were just elected to the board through the slate presented to them will not be eligible to serve as an officer on the Sutphin board until much later, which could be totally fine and sensible, but it also could, just that provision in this could cause enough contention that it's going to gum up the works. so to
Well,
speak.
except,
That's true, because remember, we're starting this brand new organization that has to find its feet. And so to put the rules in place, which means that in a year, when we're just probably, struggling to stand up, if you think of a baby now, we've just put ourselves together, formed ourselves, and now it's time to stand up and run. In a year's time, then we might find that, wait a minute, we've got to just rotate off this new leadership that we just put in place.
okay.
No,
well,
I meant if someone who is currently on the, let's say 165th Street Mall board is like, great, I just got elected to the Sutphin, like what is legally the Sutphin board now. I want to be the treasurer. They're not going to be able to do that because the bylaws say that they have to wait for 2 more years. And so the very inclusion of that clause might rile some people up.
Well, no, not if the intention is for it to take effect, let's say in the future. So we can just add something, we can preface it by saying, with the exception of individuals who became board members on such and such, when the boards became consolidated, with the exception of those individuals who automatically qualify, in the future, or 2 years from now, this is what the requirement will be. Because you're right. I mean, look, we're a newly consolidated board now. And since we're a newly consolidated board, anybody who is now a member of the board should be in a position where they can run for any office. But in the future, after, let's say, effective after year 2025, if you understand, if after 2025, anybody who now wants to run for president, chairperson or vice chairperson, would have been required to serve for at least a period of 2 years.
Right. Originally, that was what you said, Sarah. You said that this election will then, we'll put in an executive committee in place for 1 year. And then at the next annual meeting in 2024, we would vote in a new set of leadership in a
Sarah,
new
may I
executive
make a
committee, which will
suggestion?
go in for the 2 years.
Okay, may I make a suggestion? I know, we're supposed to have an annual meeting coming up very soon, okay? Is it possible for us to meet again next week, Wednesday or Thursday next week, so that this way, between now and Wednesday, the language that we're arguing about, we would have an opportunity to mull it over, because this thing can keep us here till like 12 o'clock at night. You understand? So that if you guys don't object, what we can do is we can conclude this meeting with the understanding that maybe next Wednesday or so, we'll meet again, and during that time, you can contact me, Glenn, and we'll figure this out.
I like that.
Okay? Thank you, Robin. Yeah. Okay, no, seriously, because this thing can keep us here till God knows when. Okay, and
So what else is on the agenda? Did we
Right.
address everything else? This is it?
this is pretty much it.
Well, hold on, let me,
There may be, Sarah, are there some straightforward things that we can look at? So there might be something to add to this. Maybe
yeah,
there's not.
let me just glance over this real quick. I also want to point out, in case it affects anyone, that Wednesday, the 22nd of next week is the beginning of Ramadan. Let me just glance through this. Let's see, this is all statutory. This is discretionary, but it doesn't impact anything. Hold on, let me see if there's anything else that's discretionary. Actually, the rest of this is not discretionary. It's statutory. I just wanted to educate you guys on why a whistleblower policy is required now, but there's nothing else that's really worth meaningful review.
Yeah,
This is really the last.
In the interim between now and the next meeting, you can send us emails. Okay, and you can say, listen, this is what I'm suggesting, and we can respond to it. So by the time we meet within a week or so, we would already know what it is that we're going to be discussing, and what our positions are. Because I think this is crucial, especially for Sutphin Boulevard. Because, I mean, all of a sudden, these guys are coming into our board and there's always a possibility that they can try to take over the board. Okay, and you know, that's very important to us. So we need to get it right. And that's why I'm suggesting that we don't want to rush things. We need to think about it, and a couple of days thinking about it, I don't think would be a problem.
Are other people amenable to that? Are other people willing to meet again next week? Because if we can't get quorum, then it's gonna be a moot point.
Well, I have to leave in a couple minutes anyway, so I would prefer that we do adjourn this to another day.
Okay, what
Uh,
day? can we-
Let's be respectful of Ramadan and do it before. When does Ramadan start?
The 22nd?
okay, So you want to do it on the 21st?
Monday or Tuesday.
No, let's do Tuesday, the 21st at about the same times, 6:30.
Well, maybe make it a little earlier, make it at 6 rather than 6:30, because then it goes into,
It goes into dinner time.
yeah.
Yeah,
So what
That's
about
fine.
6 next Tuesday?
That's
that works
fine.
for me.
That works for me. as
For
well.
me,
I have a
Okay,
meeting at that time, but I can probably, I don't know, maybe I can switch it or somebody else from the office can come
Okay.
to.
Well, what about Monday then? Is Monday better?
Well, 6:30 is
Uh,
better, but it's
no.
up to you guys.
For me, I have the same type of conflict on Monday.
Oh, okay.
all right.
So Tuesday then?
yeah,
So
Tuesday,
Tu-
6?
Tuesday,
I'll try
Tuesday
to
at
come.
6.
I'll try to figure it out.
Okay.
Right.
But
Now,
Okay.
someone will come even if it's not me.
okay, is there a motion on the floor for us to adjourn this meeting?
So before we make the motion, Alex, so you're gonna go through this with a fine tooth comb before then, so that we can get to the bullet point, the stuff that we really truly.
Okay. Just like I did with the contracts, remember?
Yeah, no, that's what I'm saying is because I'm not, this is, I could follow you.
Don't worry, I will
You're,
do.
this is attorney work, so.
Robin, he did very well with the contract, so I'm sure he will do amazing.
Yeah.
Robin, while the other two organizations hired attorneys for those contracts, myself and Glenn, we did it ourselves.
No, I wasn't questioning whether you can do it. I know that you can do it. And
Good.
what I'm saying is, please do so that when we meet next week,
Absolutely.
that we could go right through the important issues quickly.
To me, that's the most important issue there.
Okay.
All right, Sarah, we will be in contact.
Okay, and wait, before you make a motion to adjourn, I do want to give a plug for signing up for the Eventbrite link for the registration at the annual meeting. If you could not be there in person, you could designate Alex as a proxy to vote on your behalf in your best interest. Glenn can circulate the Eventbrite link. I sent it out before. I'm due to send a reminder, but the last official date that you can sign up is the 18th, which is Saturday. We have to set that record date under the law so we can verify the membership between then and the meeting so we can determine who's
And the
allowed to vote. But anyway, please,
correct?
please sign up for that.
The meeting.
and this went out to the community as well, right? In general, some community stakeholders, yeah.
Yes,
And the meeting is on the 29th, correct?
That's
correct.
Okay.
10 a.m.
10 a.m. And where's it?
Be there.
J
Wait.
Cal.
Takeout.
JCAL, Jamaica Center for Arts and Learning at 161-04 Jamaica Avenue.
Oh, that place. I don't even know where it is. I'm just joking. I don't know. Okay, so is there a motion for us to adjourn?
I make a motion.
Okay, and
I second the emotion,
okay, is
the motion.
any opposition for us to adjourn? Being that there's no opposition for us to adjourn, the meeting is adjourned. Okay, have a good night, everyone. Sarah will be.
Nice to see everyone. Have a good night.
Thank
Good
you,
night,
Good night,
everyone.
everybody. Nice
Good
to
night.
see you all.
Good luck,
Robin, I'll
Puerto
be in
Rico,
touch.
California.
Thank you.
Sarah, don't leave yet. Sarah, oh, she left.
No,
Okay.
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Okay. Sarah, the best time to reach me are the afternoons. The mornings are crazy.